All right, welcome everyone to Love and Adulthood Monthly. I am your friendly neighborhood sex witch, Andrea Devon Bertoli. I work as a pleasure coach, sex educator, and a facilitator of sacred spaces in person and online. And we host these free monthly workshops focused on all of the things related to midlife intimacies. I'm 46, perimenopausal. We're in a relationship that we started just a few years ago, so kind of in our own midlife journeys. And we talk about sex and pleasure and eroticism and relationships in ways that bridge the esoteric and the woo and the sensual into Christopher's deep clinical expertise and my sex education background. So you'll get a mix of both of us today in our topic around reckoning and repair. And this is a very tender subject for both of us, and I imagine for many of you as well. We'll be talking about infidelity, betrayal, and how to come to terms with that and have the conversations with your beloveds so that you can avoid having these types of situations. So again, we host these events online free monthly. I hope you'll keep joining us. We also have a bunch of um, content and writings and online workshops available for you, in addition to our individual sessions that we each offer. But we both offer individual and couples sessions. So I'll drop some links in once Christopher starts talking about different ways to stay connected with us if you're not already. And now I hand it over to my love.
Hi, y'all. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Christopher Brown, 20 plus years clinical psychotherapist, clinical social worker, and psychotherapist. I became Gottman trained. For those of you who are familiar with relationship therapy, it's an evidence-based approach to couples therapy and relationship therapy. I did that because I come from the deep south of the U.S. in Louisiana and Texas, where most of what we are told about relationships is rooted in a fairly puritanical and Christian evangelical sort of ethos. And I didn't really want to be one of the cast of characters who comes from a Protestant or a Catholic perspective to tell people what's right about relationships. I wanted to see what the data told us. And along the way, I became a sex therapist because so much of relationship work in my therapy world basically says if you have a sex problem, you must have a relationship problem. And if you fix the relationship problem, then the sex follows. And my experience was that that happened in about 4 out of 10 cases. And so it led me on a path to becoming a certified sex therapist in 2019. That was not my intention. I was just trying to help one particular couple. And to be honest, to help myself in my sexless relationships. So there's a lot here to unpack. If you're here for reckoning and repair, I can only assume that either you're a big fan of Andrea's, as am I, or you are affected by infidelity somewhere in your life. And I can say at this point in my life, love and adulthood is just that. In midlife and late midlife, I'm looking back to say, how did I get here as a psychotherapist? How did I get here as a husband? How did I get here as a lover? And what I really saw, not surprisingly, is that most of the things I work with now in my practice are things that have deeply affected my life that I have lived. And I can tell you, I've been a psychotherapist for over 20 years, but I have been affected by infidelity since I was 5. And I have lived every angle of infidelity that we're going to talk about today. So, to some degree, this is going to be story time with your sex therapist friend here. And really, my experience with infidelity comes from a family system where my mother took my 12 years older sister, 12 years older than me, 12 years older sister to surveil my father going in and out of a strange apartment and catching him in the act of infidelity. At that point, the 5-year-old boy I was, my familial life exploded. And the story I was told is that dad was a cheater, he was bad, and he left us for this other woman. Okay, so we're going to put a pin in that, and I'm going to come back around to it at the end of our session because that was the story I was told and I was raised with. Okay, and that story, probably more than any other, has shaped who I am, who I had to become, what I needed to undo, and what I needed to embrace. So just kind of hold that as we go through this experience of reckoning and repair. And so, why is this called reckoning and repair? As a therapist, I take a very different approach to cheating than popular culture, at least in the West, prescribes. Um, so one of my mentors, Esther Perel, says that infidelity is one of the behaviors across cultures, and she's a cross-cultural expert, that is universally condemned while universally practiced. Okay. And that's not saying that every person, commits or is affected by infidelity, although I would submit that probably if we went far enough into the family histories that we all are, but that across cultures there is infidelity and across cultures there is condemnation. So there really is this disconnect. And in an increasingly clip-driven world where we're on TikTok or we're on Instagram and we're getting most of our entertainment that way, and as well as most of our information, infidelity remains one of the most clippable items that you can just kind of boil it down culturally to good guys and bad guys, cheaters and victims, right? As a clinician and as a human being who has lived all sides, I take a very different view of going, okay, how has this happened? How did these people get here? And what do they want to do next? What do they want to do next? So, as a clinician, we have to reckon first. If you're coming into my practice because you have discovered an infidelity or you're committing an infidelity in your relationship and you're in crisis, and you come into me, you're coming in a heightened state of nervous system arousal and you want it fixed, triaged, vented. There's a lot, right? We have to reckon first. And we're going to walk through all of the possibilities of reckoning. And I maybe should have titled this talk Reckoning or Repair. Or maybe reckoning and or repair, because repair isn't required. Repair isn't required. Repair, if you're doing it right, in my clinical opinion, repair is a choice that gets made down the line. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's get started. So first of all, let me invite you to drop into the chat any sort of reactions that you're having to this basic idea. The basic idea is infidelity, if we go back far enough, probably affects all of us, maybe directly, maybe indirectly, and that it is a much more nuanced experience than our clip culture or online culture wants us to believe, where there's just a good guy and a bad guy. So any reactions to that in the chat are welcome. The way this is going to go is I'm going to be talking, but I'm going to check in periodically with Andrea, who'll be monitoring the chat, because if you have specific issues or specific concerns, I can pivot what I'm talking about to address what you want. But your mechanism to get to me is going to be through that chat. Okay, so first thing, Andrea, anything in the chat that I need to be aware of before I start rolling?
No, darling, nothing in the chat other than just a reminder in case anybody dropped in a few moments late. If you want to drop it in anonymously, you can just message me separately, just in the chat, just do the drop down so that you're messaging just Andrea, and I'll be able to read it to the group without any identifying information. That's always an option. And the chat is not being recorded or saved or anything like that. So there's no kind of record on that. Um, yeah, that's it from me. Nothing in the
Oh,
chat yet. Other
okay.
than somebody says, my blood is warming up in all of this. Thank you. I know it's also very
Well,
early where
and
she
look
is.
for
So
and look for some people, the blood is going to get boiling, right?
yeah.
And especially if you have just discovered infidelity. So remember the core story of mine. I discovered the family I was in, the nuclear family, discovered infidelity when I was about 5. I was really confused when I came home one day or I went outside one day and we had a swimming pool in our backyard and all my father's belongings were in the swimming pool. I'm like, what happened? So talk about blood warming. There's blood boiling, right? There's blood boiling. But again, I get ahead of myself. Let's talk first about the cheating climate. Okay. So the cheating climates. So how do we set up this relationship dynamic where infidelity and cheating becomes almost this culturally universal experience? Right? So there are certain things that happen in our climate, in my opinion, and also the research bears this out. First of all, the first truism that I want you all to know, if you remember nothing else from this talk, please remember this. Write it down, make a note in your app. What doesn't get talked about gets acted out. What doesn't get talked about gets acted out. Okay. So that's the first thing we all need to hold as we go through the rest of this talk. I'm going to set up some environmental factors that kind of make relationships vulnerable to infidelity and cheating. First of all, let's talk about what is cheating in the first place. The probably the most cultural recognized cheating is you put your genitals in contact with somebody else's genitals to whom you are not married, right? That's kind of, oh, well, that's cheating. And I can't tell you how many people in my practice come in and they're telling me about themselves or telling me about their relational beliefs, and that is their third rail. If my spouse cheats on me, I am out. Now, I can't tell you how many people go back on that rule once they discover it. And we can talk some about that too. About, hey, I come in with this hard and fast rule about what I believe in my relationship, and usually a de facto monogamous relationship, by the way. And I'll tell you what I mean by de facto. What I mean by de facto is not negotiated, it's assumed, right? Is that's the third rail. And then it happens, and then they can't leave or they don't leave. And they're like, well, who the hell am I? And who the hell am I is going to be a lot of the reckoning we have to talk about. Okay, so what is cheating? There is, yes, go.
Can we actually throw that to the audience? I would love to hear
Oh, sure. Before I give you
what,
my list, yeah.
yeah, rather than just giving them a list, I would love to hear, like, other than the kind of, I'll say classic, but the kind of baseline definition Christopher
Well,
gave.
it's the
Like,
culturally assumed one,
yeah,
right? If your genitals touch somebody else's genitals that aren't mine, that's cheating, and we all know it,
period, the
right?
end. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, what are some other examples of cheating that maybe you unfortunately have experienced yourself, that you have perpetrated yourself? Maybe you saw in friends, family, your family of origin, that you see in culturally. Um, what are some of the things that might be considered cheating for you outside of this kind of direct genital to genital contact? I'd love to hear if anybody has anything to add.
Yeah, and it's not a trick, y'all. It's really, I've got a list, but my list is hardly exhaustive. So, this is a great chance to drop in what you're going through if you want us to kind of customize our content to what you're going through.
Yeah, somebody wrote my ex emotionally cheated, which we'll talk about a lot, kind of what that is. A relationship governed by core deception, financial infidelity, emotional infidelity. Yeah, financial infidelity is really interesting to me, and we'll talk about that too. A breach of trust and boundaries within a set of relationship agreements. Yeah, thank you for bringing that
Mm,
term into the conversation. We're going to talk a lot about relationship agreements. And Christopher, you just said it, this idea of like this default monogamy, right? Like, well, two people meet and we get together and we just assume monogamy. And maybe that's not assumed. Maybe it is important to be monogamous, but how do we create agreements around that, right? So I appreciate the person who mentioned a set of relationship agreements, implicit or otherwise. So yeah, the implicit and the explicit will be something we dive into
And
quite a
it's a
bit.
great point because one of my specialties is ethical non-monogamy, and a lot of people who are maybe not in an E&M dynamic or have never lived it think, "Oh, okay, well, this is the solution to cheating. There is no cheating if you're open." Oh no, that is not true. In fact, I mean, there's a lot of betrayal in E&M, just like there is in monogamy, right? So that's one of the myths we want to debunk, right? That just because I'm open doesn't mean, a lot of people maybe think, "Oh, okay, I won't be vulnerable to betrayal if I am in." Woke enough to have an open arrangement. Oh no, I get lots of open folks who are coming into my practice because they have hit a betrayal that they never saw coming because they had an open arrangement or an open agreement. Okay,
Yeah.
so just to hit a couple emotional affairs, to speak to that one. So generally speaking, clinically, you will think of an emotional affair as something where there is intimacy, Shirley Glass, a pretty famous writer and practitioner with infidelity, used to talk about and has written about windows and walls. So with intimacy, the idea is let's just assume a negotiated monogamous dyad, which is rarer than you think, but a negotiated monogamous dyad, and then I start putting walls up with my partner, with my spouse, and I start opening up windows into my life to my outside person. Okay. So there's that intimacy. There's now doors and I mean walls rather, and the walls imply the second part. So there's intimacy, there's secrecy. I have put a wall up. I am talking about my marriage or my relationship to the outside person. I've opened up a window into my life to that person, and I have put up a wall with my spouse because they don't know I'm having these conversations. And then third, there's a sexual aura around the exchange. Because I will get a lot of people who are perpetrating the infidelity or the emotional affair, and they'll come into my office as if I'm Judge Judy, or if you're old enough, Judge Wapner, and they want me to decide who the guilty party is, right? Because we kind of live in this American culture of absolute truth, right? And they want me to decide and to, to be that decider. And so a lot of the defenses from the person who is in the outside relationship is, but we didn't have sex. We didn't have, my genitals never touched their genitals, so it was okay. It wasn't cheating, right? Because it wasn't that culturally kind of assumed and understood one singular monolithic definition of cheating. Oh no. I mean, that spouse is betrayed and feels betrayed and then feels kind of, I mean, first of all, their whole world is rocked. And second of all, then they're told, but it wasn't an affair, right? So now they're kind of effectively gaslit, right? So emotional affairs can be as damaging or maybe sometimes more damaging than a purely sexual one-off experience outside of a negotiated monogamous relationship. We talked about financial betrayal. Andrea mentioned it, and it's a particular interest of hers. Andrea, do you want to speak to that since it is a particular interest of yours and one you have done a lot of work around?
I mean, some of you know that I kind of got into this work of sexuality through my money work, actually. I really had a lot of my own money stuff to work through and did do that. And I think what I experienced was not so much financial infidelity, but financial like dependency. And I see that so often in heterosexual partnerships where the woman really gets left behind because of, infidelity, because of, a husband having a secret life when it comes to gambling or supporting another family or something like that. So I think it's of particular interest in mine. And recently we went, this tells you a little bit about me and Christopher. We went on our anniversary trip and we went on this little road trip and I took him to some place really beautiful. And on the way up, we listened to this like incredibly depressing memoir of divorce. And we got there and we were like, why are we so sad? Why don't we want to have sex on our anniversary? It's mystery. Um, and it
It's
was
an
a book.
occupational hazard, y'all. I really do try to have a better time, but sometimes, get in. Hey, I know what we'll do. We'll listen to Strangers by Belle Burden. And you may have read reviews of this or read the book yourself. It's a fascinating view into WASP culture, by the way. That's white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, of which I am one. But yeah, financial betrayal was a big player in the Belle Burden story, and we can talk about it because she's literally written the memoir about it.
Yeah. So that's all I'll say about that. I don't want to derail the conversation too much. I'll have you
Okay.
continue.
So then we get into now in this day and age, we're going to talk about online and digital relationships, right? Because if it's just texting, is it cheating? If it's just camming, is it cheating? Back to tying in the financial betrayal, if it's just OnlyFans.
Or on
And I'm
Instagram, my boyfriend follows a bunch of hot women on Instagram. Ah.
There you go. There you go. Yes, all of that. And I mean the online portion of it where and again we want to think about that emotional affair definition, right? Remember the two rules so far. If you don't remember anything else, what doesn't get talked about gets acted out. So you can see if there are walls up between you and a spouse or primary partner. Already you're vulnerable, right? Because you're not talking about something that's really important in your life, this tertiary or secondary relationship. Then we're talking about intimacy, secrecy, and a sexual aura. Okay, just kind of show of hands in a chat, maybe with an emoji. Those who among you, like give me a thumbs up emoji if you think you can form a digital or online relationship that has secrecy, that has intimacy, and has a sexual aura. And give me a thumbs down if you think you can't.
Yeah, we got a thumbs up, floaty.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is an interesting conversation, and then I feel like this could be like its own conversation around like parasocial relationships, which is to say like I fell in love with the stranger on Instagram, or I met somebody slid into my DMs, and now we have a date,
Hmm.
to meet on Zoom. I met um, I started following someone on OnlyFans and it was really interesting and I got really into their story and now I'm giving them a bunch of money every month and I'm also kind of in love with them, right? Like, but it's not really in real life. So does that count? Does it count, for
And
yeah.
for a lot of people, they're coming in if they're the one engaging in and saying, no, it doesn't count because my genitals didn't touch their genitals. In fact, they can't. It's all on a screen. What's the big deal? Okay, but that's where, okay, that secrecy is the big deal, that intimacy with another person, maybe the sexual aura with the other person. We're going to talk about all of these things as we go. So, those are big things to think about because now it's not just in real life where you used to see stuff. And for those of you who are on social media, it's hard to know what everybody knows and what we don't because things go viral in their little silos. But for those of you who remember, and I think it was, is it Astronomer, the Coldplay couple, where the CEO was, holding really intimately the HR director on the kiss cam, and the internet did what it did. And once, Chris Martin calls him out on the kiss cam and literally says, "Oh, they're either really shy or they're having an affair." Right? It turns out they got doxxed and he got fired and she, I think, resigned. I don't think she got fired, but I think she resigned. And then Gwyneth Paltrow, Chris Martin's ex-wife, is doing, ads for Astronomer. I mean, it's just insane how infidelity seems to be the one thing now that we can all sort of catalyze on and we can all pay attention to. In my world, I'm a sports fan. There's a football coach and a former head writer for sports for The Athletic, which is a branch of the New York Times, and they're alleged to have had an ongoing affair for 5 to 10 years. And now it's become this story that just kind of captures a lot of cultural attention. So, I mean, there really is this kind of charge to infidelity and it draws us in kind of like we have the metaphor of watching a train wreck, right? Like I can't look away, like I want to know what happens next. And infidelity has that element, right? And I think it's going to have it whether it happens at work like it did with the football coach and the writer, or it happens online through Instagram, TikTok, Signal. I mean, you name it. They're just all kinds of, platforms in which you can form these relationships that have secrecy, intimacy, and a sexual aura. Okay, a few more. Ongoing double life. Okay, so there's a real difference between the kind of one-off extracurricular sexual experience that happens, say, on a business trip or on a vacation, right? And Andrea said it earlier, hey, this person who is supporting two people with their income. So not only is it this sexual and emotional betrayal, but it's also a financial betrayal. So the ongoing double life is its own thing, especially if the people involved decide to get to repair. And there's a double life that's been going on. So there's a lot to manage in the repair process and the recovery process if they decide to get to that point. Okay, let's see. Anything else? We talked about this. Setups for cheating. Setups for cheating. Okay, so what are the environmental factors and the relational factors now that make folks more vulnerable to cheating and infidelity? One, I would say lie-inducing agreements. Okay, so what is a lie-inducing agreement? Um, there are people who, for a number of reasons, and I would put myself in this category. Remember my story, right? So I'm 5 years old. My family blows up allegedly because of this experience of infidelity that, My mom involved my older sister and my brother in like they were amateur PIs catching dad in the act. Um, when that when that happens, there's a default. There's a default to um, you know, sex with you forever and attraction to you forever. You're all I'll ever need. You're my one and only. You're my twin flame. You're my soulmate, right? So the lie-inducing agreement becomes that one person in the world will now turn off every instinct of attraction you ever had before you met them. That in and of itself is a lie-inducing agreement. It's a really pretty myth, right? It's a really pretty story in sort of 80s era rom-coms. But this idea that you are wired for connection to other people, but then you're going to meet one and then all those instincts are going to stop, that in and of itself is all it takes to be a lie-inducing agreement. Okay, there are other types of lie-inducing agreements, right? Um, Usually, and I say this as a person who has a fundamentally disorganized attachment style. And for those of you who don't know what disorganized means, it means it's a hybrid of anxious attachment and avoidant attachment. So it's like, I would like to say the crown jewel of insecure attachment styles. That's me. So lie-inducing agreements, particularly the avoidance out there for my avoidance in the crowd, I don't want to talk about the kind of sex I'm into. I don't want to talk about the kind of attractions I have. And so I'm going to enter into a marriage because it's going to be, now I can live right. If you grew up in an evangelical type culture like I did, I'm finally going to live the right way. Right? And marriage is going to be my solution to all these confusing to me aspects of my attraction and my sexuality, but I'm going to enter into marriage and then I'm going to have this safe haven of normalcy, right? Whatever normal means in this culture, right? That in and of itself, if I have denied fundamental aspects of myself and I've retreated into marriage to try to fix it or hide it, that in and of itself is a lie-inducing agreement, right? If there are things I can't talk about myself or my history or my desires or what I want for the future, if there are things that you're consciously aware of and you can't talk about them, it's a lie-inducing environment. It's a lie-inducing environment. So I can't tell you how many times I get into these recovery situations with folks and we discover lie-inducing agreements that they were unaware of because they were good waspy white Anglo-Saxon Protestant kind of folks or British folks with a stiff upper lip, and we just don't talk about such things. Okay, remember what we don't talk about gets acted out. Okay. So, any questions or anything in the chat, Andrea, about lie-inducing agreements or anything we've talked about so far?
No, I'm gonna add one though, because I remember a friend telling me years ago, well, I don't let my partner masturbate because that's cheating. And I was
Oh
like,
boy.
um, mm, so then, I mean, just as a sex educator, I would say that's a fundamentally wrong assumption, um, because it denies the person's own innate sexuality, but also it creates this lie-inducing agreement. So if her partner then wanted to masturbate and he did, that makes him a liar, but he's not doing anything wrong, right? Because he's just acting on his own innate sexuality, and everybody deserves sexual autonomy, right? And I'm continually struck by just the intensity with which she just so clearly believed, like, no, like masturbation is cheating. And I was like, oh, fuck. Like, that relationship is no longer together.
Yeah.
Our
Yeah. I mean
lie-inducing agreements. Oh,
that's a
go
great
ahead.
one because right, I mean then anytime I masturbate, but I know my person has this red line around it, what am I gonna do?
I'm gonna hide. I'm gonna lie.
That's
I'm gonna
it.
be in shame about it,
That's it.
or at least secrecy, if not shame. Somebody asked, are lie-inducing agreements similar to what goes in with addictions? I think addiction is a really important thing here. I mean, I would say, addiction in and of itself is kind of a lie-inducing agreement because especially if we're like high functioning addicts, like there's part of us that's like hiding that, right? Clinician, what would you suggest about that?
So it kind of depends on the addiction we're talking about. Like I do think shame is a huge player, and Andrea mentioned it just then. And I think there's a lot of shame around addiction where I'm wired to hide certain behaviors,
Yeah.
right? And because I'm ashamed, right? And so it's not always I want to hide it. It's not always only I want to hide this from my partner, but I don't want to think about it myself. Right. So then I have this split in myself. Here, the love lust split. You'll hear this referred to sometimes as the Madonna whore complex. But oh my God, I was doing an eval one time. I used to work at the Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, and we had a focal evaluation team that was tied in with a ton of organizations. Like think of the American Dental Association, the American Medical Association. The Roman Catholic Church sent us a priest who absolutely was abusing young boys. And I watched in the evaluation this man say, on the one hand, just talk about what he did, right? And talk about what he did with these children. And then within the half hour, he says, but I don't have sex. I'm a Roman Catholic priest. And he believed it. I believe he wasn't hooked up, by the way, but I believe he would have passed a polygraph with that second sentence. Right? So there are times where you are hiding things from yourself. And remember, the things we can't talk about get acted out. The things we can't talk about get acted out.
Yeah.
Right. So I do think with addiction, there's that. It does kind of bring me to a point where I have to get up on a little bit of a soapbox here because sex addiction is a great metaphor for what clinically I think of and a lot of my colleagues think of as out of control sexual behavior. But the classic definition of sex addiction or the classic definition of addiction includes some physical characteristics such as tolerance and withdrawal symptoms. So think about alcohol, right? If I drink enough of it, I need to drink more of it to get the same intoxicating effect. And if I go without that substance, so like for example, if I quit cold turkey, it literally throws my system into life-threatening withdrawal. Okay. So I think sex addiction is a good metaphor for out of control sexual behavior, but it's a poor clinical definition of behavior. Then here, and I'll get off the soapbox, I promise. A lot of people will go into, and this is kind of cheating a little bit on the repair piece, but I'll say it here. Um, the root of addiction treatment, typically in a 12-step model, which has gotten, appropriated for all kinds of behavioral things, including sex, including screens, including gambling, including social media addiction. Um, the root goal of 12-step programs is abstinence. Okay, so I'm a sex positive sex therapist. I don't believe in abstinence unless someone chooses that for their own reasons, right? But I don't believe in a treatment program that forces abstinence, right? It starts to be coercive. It's very heteronormative, and it kind of has its roots in evangelical traditions, which want to demonize and pathologize human beings for having the sexual orientations they have, for example. So it gets to be a really slippery slope. Now, here's the cheat code on repair. Sex addiction treatment has become so prolific in our culture that oftentimes it's a place where couples go to hide. And what I mean by that is, hey, we've discovered, usually in terrible ways, all these sexual behaviors that were going on, whether emotional, physical, or both. And then we're going to throw a label of sex addiction on the cheater, on the perpetrator, and we're going to pathologize the cheater. So because he or she usually just have a distinct problem that they have to go get treatment for, and then I, as the surviving spouse or partner, have a very good story that I can tell my friends as an excuse for why I stayed. Right? Because one of the problems with repair, for those who want to stay, we have a good cultural narrative for the person who gets cheated on and then leaves and walks out and says, I am not going to be disrespected in that way. Right? They'll get a lot of community support for leaving. But there's this weird discrimination that goes against the betrayed partner who decides to stay. There's not a great cultural narrative for that. So what I see in my practice is a lot of people throw the label sex addiction on it, and then their communities can understand, well, I understand because he was an addict. And then he went off and got addict treatment, and you were just noble for staying by them. That is a cheap solution to repair that is going to engender another cycle of betrayal because we haven't gotten to the core of what created the lie-inducing agreement. Okay, so that's my strong take on that. Let me make space for anybody's questions in the chat or Andrea, anything you have to say to that, because that's a mouthful.
Mm-hmm. No, nothing just yet.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the rest of the setups for cheating. Okay, so existential crisis. So a lot of people think cheating happens because there's something wrong in the relationship, and sometimes there is. Sometimes there really is. For example, if sexlessness is in a relationship and one person doesn't want to retire sexually, then that's a prime setup for cheating that has a root cause in the relationship itself, right? So I can't get sexual expression here. Um, we're both avoidant, so we don't like to talk about these kinds of things. So then I just kind of get something going on the side over here, but I keep it real secret, right? So that's an issue in the relationship. There are oftentimes people who cheat that there's nothing wrong in their relationship. So how do we start to understand that? So existential crisis means this. I've seen plenty of people who go out and form an extramarital affair when they themselves have gotten a life-threatening medical diagnosis, for example. When I'm staring death in the face, it's, oh, what is it I want to feel? And for those of you who have been in a relationship before, you have probably gone through a real endorphin high called new relationship energy. And it is intoxicating. It literally hits the nucleus accumbens in the brain like cocaine. And there are some people who will get a diagnosis like that and they want to feel alive. They want to feel vital. And there's not much that makes us feel vital like new relationship energy. So again, and when there's existential crisis, nothing wrong in the relationship. It's fine. It's been solid for 20, 25 years. And then this news comes in and boom, as I'm staring death in the face, I want to feel alive. Okay. Now, that may be hard to hear. It may be unpopular, but it's true. It oftentimes what walks into my practice. So, existential crisis, loss of self. This is what Esther's conclusion, or one of her conclusions from her book, State of Affairs, says, is that, and she says it in her way, so I'm paraphrasing her here almost word for word. She says, we don't usually seek a relationship outside of our primary relationship because we have lost something in the relationship. It's because we have lost a part of ourselves, right? So it's an aspect of self that doesn't have expression in this relationship, and I went looking for it. It's very much tied to the existential thing, right? Like I haven't had this kind of sex in years. It's gone. It's no longer available. New relationship energy literally isn't available anymore. So I want to go find it again before I die, right? So it's a loss of sense of self. The next part, and this is something I think Andrea and I can speak to, is in mixed orientation couples, there may be, if it's a monogamous and negotiated or non-negotiated monogamy, inevitably you have lost a part of your sexual expression if you're a mixed orientation couple. So I may go looking for expression of that part of me. So Andrea, is there anything there that you want to speak to?
I am in the chat chatting with somebody about something that's going on. So no, you
Okay.
continue.
Great. I've already talked about avoidant attachment styles. I speak to this as I had disorganized attachment, and it means I have a really special mix of anxious and avoidant. And so for my avoidant folks out there, if like, and Andrea and I get this sometimes, and I think it's a rightful criticism of our relationship. We'll say to people, "Hey, we never fight." And somebody, comes to the side later and says, "Hey, what's this bit about you guys never fight?" Because if you're avoiding the hard thing and not having fights because you're avoidant, then you are set up for some sort of expression of that part of you that's not getting talked about. Remember what gets talked to, what can't get talked about gets acted out. It's a setup for extra outside of agreement expression, if you will, or cheating. Okay. Let's see. Anything else? Oh yeah, these are neat. Assumed or non-negotiated monogamy. Absolutely true. Hey, we got into this relationship, and I assumed that my definition of monogamy, and Andrea hit on this earlier, porn is cheating to me. Obviously, it's cheating to you. But hey, I'm an active porn user. It's part of my solo sex practice. It's not cheating. It's me having my own fantasy and expression life with a visual stimulation or an auditory stimulation. How can that be cheating? Okay, that's something that really is problematic. And it goes to, I mean, things like flirting. Is flirting okay with other people? Is kissing okay? Kissing other people okay? I mean, there's all sorts of parts of monogamy to negotiate, but we all just sort of culturally default to we all mean the same thing when we say it. Go.
Or I kissed a girl, but that's different than kissing a boy.
Say more.
This goes back to what we've talked about before in some other workshops around some non-monogamous or curious people lean towards, threesomes or dating. But if there's a bisexual woman, like our particular agreement, as I proudly, happy pride, wave the bisexual
Yeah,
flag.
we're a mixed orientation couple, y'all. I'm,
Yeah.
I'm straight. She's bisexual.
I have been in other relationships, which now I would not be in, which say like it's okay for you to date other women, but not other men. It's okay for you to have sex with other women, but not other men. And that is rooted in deep misogyny and deep homophobia, which is to say that sex with women is somehow less important, less interesting, less threatening. So, if I was in that type of agreement, which we are not, just to be very clear, if Christopher's rule was I can date and kiss and have sex with other women, but then if I had sex with another man, like that would be cheating under that rubric, right? And then it brings up all these questions of like, well, what does it mean? What if it's a trans person? What if it's a non-binary person who happens to have a penis? Like, so the one penis policy is like deeply flawed and again rooted in misogyny and homophobia. And yet it happens, right? There are plenty of people who are in agreements like that. So there's that too.
Yeah, a couple of things here. I mean, this is inside baseball stuff about Andrea and me. So she had been in several other relationships that were one penis policies, and they seem to work. And I'm asking Andrea, not telling at this point. They seem to work well enough for you, yeah? Oh, no. Okay, that's news. I learn something every day. So what?
No.
What the problem was for I? So I'll just speak for myself now that she's had a surprise answer. It didn't work for me. So I'm a feminist. I was raised by all women. I have a certain set of beliefs. And this idea that she could go have sex with other women, but not other men, offended me. I'm like, no, I'm not going to live in that kind of open because the misogyny of it is offensive to me. Now, it turns out it didn't work well for her either, so that's great. But I was really the one, and we went into some counseling around our mixed orientation and this kind of open expression and what it meant to us. Remember, what doesn't get talked about gets acted out. What doesn't get talked about gets acted out. Okay, the a couple more things. I've seen this walk into my office where there was infidelity and cheating for revenge. For revenge. Okay. One of the couples I worked with most recently said, well, I can damn well tell you that I'm not having sex with them next. I'm having sex with somebody else before I have sex with them again. This was after their infidelity was exposed, I think, for the third time. Remember, I said, hey, if we don't get the reckoning right and the repair right, the pattern will just continue. Right. So, and that's the truth of it. That's the truth of it. So, revenge is definitely a factor. Entitlement is a factor. So there are people who believe, hey, I financially support this operation. I've been living with a sexual life that I haven't enjoyed or I don't like. And, for as hard as I work and for everything I do for this family, I deserve this. I
Mm.
deserve this. So that shows up a lot where entitlement is. So if you or your partner have kind of an air of entitlement, I'm not saying you don't deserve it. I'm just saying it is one of the environmental factors that creates a cheating climate, a cheating risk climate. And then finally, I see this a lot is that what we can't talk about gets acted out. I have seen a number of people who engage in extramarital affairs or extra relationship affairs to end things.
Mm.
And I have watched it where there was a pattern of behavior where there was sort of chronic infidelity going on, and the people with whom this partner was cheating got closer and closer to their friend circle because This person was living with a volatile partner with whom they didn't feel safe. And so they didn't know how to have the conversation about ending things. So they acted out, acted out, acted out, acted out until they got closer and closer and closer. And my fundamental belief is this was not a strategy. This was an unconscious acting out of that which could not be spoken because it wasn't safe to have the conversations. It wasn't safe to have the conversations. Okay, Andrew, you had your hand up. Go.
There's a comment in the chat about what about somebody seeing a sex worker?
So then my questions for the individuals are, what are your agreements?
Mhm.
Usually with sex work, there's a cliche that I find to be clinically relevant and true that most people aren't paying sex workers to come over, they're paying them to leave. So if it's in your agreements to have extramarital affairs or extramarital relations, but you don't want an ongoing relationship, you don't want to have your person in an ongoing relationship, sex work isn't a terrible option. Isn't a terrible option. So if it's secret though, and it's not a negotiated part of the agreement, it's a betrayal. Right now, it's not the ongoing, financial support of a second family kind of deal. So it's different. A couple I worked with, they discovered in painful ways. We're going to get into discovery in a minute. They discovered this infidelity with sex workers, and remember, I don't do sex addiction treatment where I have a bias here, y'all. I mean, part of the way they do that is they hook the cheater up to a lie detector and they pepper them with questions on what they call disclosure day, where everything comes out. I mean, I don't work this way, and I don't believe in it. I think it's cruel and unusual. But I did work with a couple who's kind of wedded to that model, and what I was able to do with agreement and consent after lots of work was I'm willing to do a sexual history. So not a disclosure day, but a sexual history. And so it turns out that this person, their first sexual experience was their father taking them across the border to Mexico from Texas and having that son go, I think at the age of 13 or 14, with an older cousin to the brothel where he had his sexual debut. So his first sexual experience was with a sex worker. That was a core erotic template for this boy and sanctioned by his father, who was married to his mother, by the way. And this was the male rite of passage in that family. And this is how they did it. Well, y'all, just, pro tip here. Anything you're really into, I could do a sexual history with you and we could trace it back to the formative erotic experiences you had in your childhood. Right? So here you've got a person who's wired for sex is done this way. And then they get into the very straight presenting relationship that's culturally acceptable in the South and everything else. Well, you think that aspect of their sexuality that was rooted in sex work just went away? I mean, seriously, like y'all shoot me an emoji with a thumbs down if anybody thought that just went away once they said I do. Right? No, that's not the way we work. We don't get married and a light switch goes off. Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, that doesn't happen. And so, but he also couldn't talk about it. Remember, he was also modeled that we don't talk about such things. Because he was actually told, "Don't tell your mother about this," right? So the split happened early. Now, does this sound like some nefarious, hardcore, character defect, and psychopath that is just some chronic cheater? No, no. No. So, I mean, there's a lot going on with the sex work question. So again, if you see that going on in your relationship, then the question becomes, how did we get here? And what's the other person's capacity to have that conversation? Right? So, because we're ready as a partner to talk about a certain thing doesn't mean our partner is ready or capable of talking about it. Okay. Andrew, anything else in the chat?
Um, no, not right now.
Okay. So What often happens during the affair? During the affair. Okay, so this is something to watch out for, and this is one where I often talk about pragmatic romantics, of which I think of myself as one. You have enough lived experience in a relationship and love and adulthood, and all of a sudden it's hard to be the naive person who says, "Oh, this could never happen to me," especially after it's happened to you. Right. So I think the alternative to that sort of naive capacity, like, oh, this could never happen to me. Yeah, my dad cheated. Remember, the stuff was all in the swimming pool. But it'll never happen to me. I'll never be in that situation on either end. Right. You lose that naivete once it happens to you. And I think the solution is to be a pragmatic romantic. So here's now speaking to your pragmatism. My advice is have a good sense of your relational baseline.
Mm,
And I would update that every so often, probably every 2 years, 24 months. Um, Understand what your baseline is. Any deviation from baseline is an indication something might be going on. Here are some examples. This is hardly exhaustive, but they do happen. Increased distance or closeness, either one. So this is one. Now remember, dialectics are where there are two truths on either side, and the reality that we live is somewhere in the middle. So, one of the dialectics of relationships is closeness and distance, right? If you see a radical change from your partner, either becoming way more distant than baseline. Now, if they're always distant, if they're always avoidant, don't freak out. Like that's the baseline. But if the avoidant, who's typically distant, comes in and says, let's spend so much time together. Let's go back to that romantic place where we went. And you're like, oh, look, I'm finally getting everything I wanted. Okay, be pragmatic, people. What is going on? What is going on that is driving that increased closeness? It may be something innocuous. It may not be. It may not be. So increased closeness or distance, increased conflict or increased avoidance if it's different than baseline. If it's different than baseline. This shocks a lot of people. Oftentimes when there's an affair going on, the sex in the primary relationship increases. It increases for no known reason to the partner. Right? And if they have been lonely and been wanting more sex, and they finally, oh, finally they heard me, I would be skeptical. I would be skeptical that that motivation for that is, oh, they finally heard me. They didn't hear me for 5 years, but all of a sudden it really took.
mm.
And again, that doesn't mean it can't happen, that it can't be a miracle that they had some insight on their own and they brought it back. But usually when that happens, you're getting a lot of conversation along the way. Right? Like, oh, I finally get it, or I finally had this experience, I understand. And
Or I got on
then the
hormones, or I started antidepressants, or I started working out, or
say more about all those things because all those things are awesome. Say more.
yeah, I mean, so somebody asked a question in the chat, what if you've changed in some way that changes the conditions of the relationship? And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, which is to say, like, the way I would describe it with my clients and students is that like we are always changing, right? Christopher is always changing. I am always changing. Yes, I am in the zone of chaos known as perimenopause, and so yes, I am like distinctly changing. Although the psychedelic mushrooms have really helped, I feel way better. But like that has changed me and I continue to change. And I think the challenge is when people have these non-negotiated monogamous agreements or have this non-conversational type of relationship, which is to say, you're going to be the same, I'm going to be the same, our relationship is going to be the same forever. Like that is just not, like that is absolutely delusional. And a lot of people go into relationships that way because again, we think it can't happen to us. We think this person's perfect, like nothing's going to go wrong. When in fact, we are all multidimensional beings where things are changing all the time, hormonally, physically, relationally, needs and desires and boundaries, right? So, for example, when a lot, and this is, there's some more research emerging around this, the highest rate of suicide for women is between 45 and 55 because they're going through perimenopause and we don't have conversations or research to support them. The highest rate of divorce is that same age bracket because women get to a point where everything has changed and maybe they don't know why, or maybe they do know why and they just want to move on. Maybe they signed up for a marriage 20 years ago that no longer serves them, right? And so back to this idea of what if you've changed, like I think that goes into kind of the everyday conversations. And just a little bit of disclosure, we were going over the outline for this. We were talking about it this morning, and we had kind of a sidebar conversation about he's like, well, actually, here's what I think about what I would really like in terms of, another type of person or how we might design our relationship. And that has changed in the past, I don't know, year, let's say, based on what we've learned about ourselves, right? So we have those conversations pretty consistently around, actually, I don't want to date anybody right now. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Oh, here's the type of thing he would like to experience. Okay, great. So, and then we also are talking about aging, right? Christopher always says this, like as people with penises age, erectile dysfunction is coming. Okay, great. If I can no longer have penis and vagina sex with my partner, A, how do we rewrite our sexual menu so that we have a different type of sex together? Or do I get mad at him and punish him and go find somebody else who's younger and has a different penis? That's not really fair. Or, if somebody gets chronically ill and can no longer be the type of partner that they want to be, can you create some sort of agreement that says, like, look, I'm now in a wheelchair. I'm now disabled. I don't want to take sexuality away from you, and ours isn't what it was or what it could be or what you want. Like, please go date somebody else. I want you. I want you to be my partner. I want to stay with you, but I also understand that you have needs beyond what I can offer. So, yes,
So Andrea
conditioning.
is giving you a picture there of what repair can look like
Mm,
after reckoning,
mm,
right? So, because oftentimes what will happen is the unspoken thing is what happened to sex once I became disabled, right? And so the care partner may feel and very well be entitled, remember entitlement, to sexual expression that is literally no longer available, is literally no longer available. So for people who can't have those conversations, is cheating in that point? Are we going to lock that person up who's been care partnering for 5 to 10 years and doing without sex, and they can't talk to their partner about opening up in this way, and they go out and seek the expression that they so desperately miss about themselves? So all of a sudden, cheater as the villain doesn't look so simple anymore in that example, right? Okay. Andrew, anything else in the chat?
not yet.
Okay. A few other things that, to talk about here. The increased sex. Why does it increase sex? Because oftentimes the affair partner has found their sexuality outside and they bring themselves home. And they've now found sex and sexually relevant stimuli, so there's more of it, so they have more interest at home. Now, it's violating a fundamental sexual health principle of honesty, right? But oftentimes that's why you'll see an uptick in what was previously a low sex relationship, and all of a sudden it becomes more seemingly to you, the partner who's not engaging in the affair out of the blue. The other thing is you might see the opposite, where if you had a robust sexual life or a good enough sexual life, and all of a sudden it starts to go to zero or very little, then the person having the affair, remember windows and walls, the person cheating may really feel in a bind because what they are now, to use this language from ethical non-monogamy, is they are, unbeknownst to their partner, a hinge where they have let's say a spouse or a primary partner at home and then the affair partner. And they may feel really conflicted about having sex with their primary partner as the relationship with the other person, the hinge partner, the secondary partner, grows. Because now they're cheating either way. If I have sex with my primary partner, I'm cheating on the other partner. If I have sex with my other partner, I'm cheating on this partner. It becomes, for those, who have a conscience, which is most of us, by the way, it becomes a hell of a bind. And so one way to do that is to withdraw sexually from the primary partner. But remember, where this isn't being talked about, it's being acted out. So oftentimes the sexless partner who had a pretty robust or maybe even very good sex life before sees it going away and for seemingly no reason. Seemingly no reason. There's always a reason. Pro tip, there's always a reason. Let's see. Anything else that you need to know about this? Oh, yeah, emotional volatility. And if you see a big increase in emotional volatility, that could be an indicator. But also, if you've had a partner who's like continually asking, over years, hey, can we go to therapy? Can we address this in sex therapy? And then they stop asking, That's an indication. One, it's an indication that they may be getting their sexual needs met somewhere else, and it's also a very poor indication for the survival of that relationship. When the one who always tried stops, right? Okay. Now, just a quick minute on the double life. Oftentimes you will see the cheater engaged in compartmentalization, meaning I keep that away in my mind, right? You'll hear lies of omission, you'll hear a lot of minimization of other things, and ultimately, and this is the one of the devastating emotional impacts is gaslighting. Because usually the person, I hate to say usually, but often the person who is the betrayed partner has a sense something has gone wrong or is going wrong. And so they check it out. Hey, are you having an affair? And usually the gaslighting partner says, oh no, or they answer a question with a question. If they don't directly lie, they say, why would you ask that? How dare you? Right? And then you get this indignant reaction. But the gaslighting actually is so emotionally abusive that I'll see a lot of people by the time they get to my office, the betrayed partner can no longer trust their own instincts because they have been told for years that they were crazy or there was something wrong with them or they were projecting. This is kind of the weaponization of therapy concepts and speak in our current culture. So that happens a ton. That happens a ton. Okay, so that's the end of the environment. Now let's move to what happens in typical things I see in my practice in terms of discovery. In terms of discovery. So most often now I'm seeing discovery of the affair through technology. This is usually Gen X. Millennials are usually better. Certainly Gen Z and Gen Alpha are way better at this, but a lot of my midlife folks will come in because they don't realize their iCloud system has the text messages on the family iPad and the phone. And so inevitably, somebody will hear a message go off, they'll go check the iPad, and then they will spend hours reading this exchange between the primary partner and their affair partner. Remember, there's a wall there that they often didn't know existed, or they knew tangentially existed, but not to this degree. What doesn't get talked about gets acted out. And they're reading and they're reading and they're reading and they're discovering this whole life that their spouse has had without any of their awareness. And it can be devastating. So technology is one of the ways that this is really happening. You'll get accidental exposures. I've seen this. I literally see my spouse's car pull into a parking lot, and I follow him going, why in the world is Kyle going to the party? Is he okay? Is he doing a drug deal? You hear all kinds of, why are they driving into oh, that's why they're driving into a motel.
Somebody shared in the chat. I found out because the affair partner reached out to me on TikTok.
And there's that, right? It's, hey sis, hey bro, let me tell you what your partner's been doing. And then you get, without consent usually, the pictures, the screenshots, everything else. And I'm so sorry. It's so disorienting. I mean, it's like an earthquake happening in the foundation of your life. And I'm sorry.
In the place that's supposed to be fun and joyful, instead it becomes this like place of, yeah,
That's right.
destruction.
That's right.
Um, so I have a couple of really deep conversations that have been happening kind of on the side that I would like to bring in, but I want to
Great.
make sure like they're mm, kind of focused not necessarily on the reckoning, but more on the repair side of it. So is there more that you want to share about kind of the reckoning and coming to terms with it before we move on to repair? We also have about 20 minutes left.
Got it. So the other things you'll see are the occasional confession, right? This is what I'll say to people who are cheating. There's a sexual health issue anytime you're cheating, right? Because you could be, again, violation of sexual health principles. We all have a right to sex without unwanted pregnancy and infection. Um, but I'll get a lot of people who come in and say, I feel terrible about this one sexual experience I had on a business trip with somebody I'm never going to see again. Should I tell my partner? And my stance is that a person who cheats does not get to unload their burden of guilt at the expense of their partner. meaning I don't get to make myself feel better by confessing and shifting the emotional burden onto my primary partner. So when we talk about confession, it is absolutely in the realm of trying to make a real fierce accountability and change in self and in the relationship. But if it's simply selfish because I feel so bad and I'll feel better if I confess, we don't get to give somebody else our weight. Okay, so that's a big one. Now, typical responses once discovery has happened, you can see any of these. Denial, I didn't think this could happen to us, or this can't be true, or there must be some other explanation. There's a little bit of magical thinking in there too. Think stages of grief. In a related way, you're going to get possible rage, right? All the belongings in the swimming pool. Panic, collapse, and it looks a lot like catatonic depression. If you've had that experience yourself, like I have, or if you've known somebody who's had that, you could get in obsessive information seeking and be wary with that one, y'all. Because not all information you learn, once you learn it, you can't unlearn it. And not all information is helpful for recovery and repair. Finally, you'll get the shame collapse of the cheating partner. Okay. So that's oftentimes what you'll see in the emotional aftermath after discovery. Okay, Andrew, do you want to add anything here? Do you want me to roll into the repair? Oh, I think you're muted.
Let's roll into repair, and then I'll bring in these questions because they're really deep and really beautiful, and kind of encompass all parts of it, like how we
Got
found
it.
out what was happening, the shame that comes up with that, the healing, and the process of healing. So I think,
Yeah.
yeah,
So if people come into me, first of all, it's a chance for me to exert some real clinical leadership. Meaning, I've had people who come to therapy in the midst of discovery and they are raging, and collapsing in session and trying to make basic decisions like, what do we do with the kids at the holidays? Because I don't want to see your fucking face, right? And so they're trying to triage, logistics of their shared life. But meanwhile, there's no container for actually reckoning and repair. So, reckoning and repair, effective reckoning and repair looks like this. You come into my office after discovery. We start with the betrayed partner, and they must be validated for this to be effective, right? They must be understood, validated thoroughly, and only they get to decide when that work is done. So, my work as a therapist is to partner with the cheater, and we're going to sit here and we're going to take it and we're going to understand it. And my job is to support that person out of collapse so they can stand there and absorb the understanding and empathize, develop compassion and curiosity. So oftentimes somebody who's in the collapse of discovery of their own cheating can't stand. And so my job is to help them stand so they can stand there and take it. And then the partner tells us when they feel completely heard, understood, and validated. Then, and only then, do we shift to meaning. Now my job switches. I got to hold the partner up and restrain them out of rage and get them to the same curiosity. How did this happen? What was going on in them that this happened? Then we uncover, hey, it turns out I'm actually bisexual or I'm really gay. Or, I found a kink partner with whom I can have this sort of sexual expression that is actually vital to who I am as a human being. Oh, how did this all happen, right? Okay, there's the meaning. Then there's a decision point. The decision point is, do we want to rebuild? And if the answer is yes, then we have to basically throw a metaphorical funeral for marriage number one or relationship number one because it's over. We don't ever get the golden halo of naivete that it can't happen to us because it happened to us. So we're going to build something else. So relationship two, version two, right? And it's a whole new relationship with the same person with different rules, different agreements. Not going to make things implicit. We're not going to assume. We're going to say it. The other choice is it's over. And then my job is to help them separate. And you're not leaving the family. In this case, you're leaving the marriage, right? So what does the family look like? How does that reconfigure everything else? So it's a stay or go dilemma. right? So after the reckoning has happened, we understand the impact, we understand the meaning. Now we move to decision point. And then we either end it and reconfigure the family, or we build relationship number two. Andrea, I'll turn it over to you.
So much. Okay, so there's a question in the big group chat that I want to address first because it's a little bit shorter, I guess. It's less of a case study and more of a just a question. How to create a safety that allows people to talk about these things so that they don't get acted out is the first part. And the second part is when you do notice the early warning signals, again, how to create safety to talk about it so it's not immediately accusatory.
I mean, it's great. It's a great question, and it's a fundamental question. And I don't know that there's a universal answer to how to create safety. What I would say is there's a universal threat assessment. And so what I would say, and I have lived both sides of this, I often say to folks, if my gender role, if my literal biological sex was different and I didn't occupy a 6 foot, 200 pound body, there are relationships in my life where people would have been beating the shit out of me. And it's only because I occupied this body that I wasn't a victim of domestic violence, right?
Physical.
So, yeah, exactly. So safety in that context is really different. So that's where we start. We start with, is this physically safe or unsafe? Because if it's physically unsafe to have these conversations, we don't have them. My job is then, if you're with a domestic violence perpetrator, is usually to get you out. There are two types of domestic violence perpetrators. Metaphorically speaking, there's a pit bull who loses their shit and strikes, and then there are cobras. There are cobras who are methodical and planning. Now, I said most people aren't psychopaths. The cobras are the psychopaths. And if the safety is a fundamental safety problem like that, we don't try to have the conversation. We try to get you away from the cobras. Now, if I'm in with a pit bull, we got to get that pit bull emotionally regulated to where they don't act out in that way. So we got to ensure physical safety first, and if that's impossible, we get out. That's my mandate as a therapist is to help you get out. Now, there are people who choose to stay, and people have that right. And some people are coerced. They have so much power over them that they can't leave. So there becomes the real issue with safety. Now, if it's safety of a different kind, so like emotional terrorism, is it real? Is it happening in the present, or is this an echo of what happened in the past to you?
I just dropped in the four horsemen too, of like the baseline is the physical safety, the next level is this emotional safety. So yeah,
Correct.
run with that.
And usually emotional safety. Look, again, pro tip, every interaction we have with another person is a combination of what's happening in the present with that one person and what happened to all the people in our cast of characters that we bring to it. It's just the trick is finding out the ratio. If emotional safety, if things feel unsafe because of the ghosts of my past, and Andrea, I'll tell a story if it's okay about
Yep.
my panic attack.
Yep.
She scheduled a date with, at my encouragement, at my strong encouragement, with a dude when we were living together, and she did it, and she did exactly what I asked her to do, and she did it, and she followed her wishes, and y'all I had a fucking panic attack. I hadn't had a
At
panic
midnight.
attack. Yeah, I hadn't had a panic attack in like 20 years at that point. And I'm like, what the hell is this? And Andrea, in her sweet way, said, I won't go. I won't go because this upsets you so much. And I know enough to know, hey, I got to resource myself. You didn't do this. This isn't happening in the present between us. It's happening in my body, but it was a ghost in the machine. And I had to get myself into therapy to realize, remember mom threw all the stuff in the pool and dad was the designated cheater? Turns out my mom was slutty in the best way. And she had men in and out of the house, especially after my dad was gone. And those guys scared the shit out of me. And so the idea that Andrea might bring this man home to where we lived threw me into a childhood ghost panic, right? That had nothing to do with her. It was the ghosts in me. Now, I've also been in relationships where it was literally unsafe. That person was gonna verbally abuse me or anything else, right? So then it's, hey, putting up the stop sign, setting limits, hoping they respond. If they don't respond, will you go get the help of a professional with me so we can learn to have these conversations? No? Okay, now we got a decision point, y'all. Right? I mean, because relationships, and let's assume a dyad, because I only have two hands, they're a two-person lift. If the other person literally won't lift, you can't work hard enough to do it yourself.
Yes. And that's one of the side conversations I'm having. So I'm glad you said that unprompted because that's what I have been chatting with this person about is that we've been going back and forth a lot. So I'm just going to summarize the high points, which is that this person was sexually abused and also did some sexual abuse under duress, it sounds like. So again, like not his fault, but it is his responsibility to
Yeah.
understand that this happened and that is awful. Hard stop.
Yeah.
And it is also not this partner's job to do the work. And the male partner in this seems like he really just walked away from that work and doesn't want to do it. And so the person I'm chatting with is really feeling this heartbreak of like, oh, like I love this person and it was so harmful and they are so, stuck in this shame and they don't want to do the work, which feels like its own kind of version of not infidelity so much, but more of a betrayal, right? Like, I really want to grow and fix this and be together and do this. And like, it is, I mean, I feel like I've just learned this over the past few years around my parental relationship, not my love relationship, which is that like, no matter how much we love them and how much we know and how much healing work we do, we cannot make other people change. We cannot do their work for them. And it really was the work of the past couple of years, while also building the relationship with Christopher, while also planning our wedding, while also building our business and moving across the country, to really, really come to terms with that with my parents. And again, this is a parental relationship and not a romantic one, but the devastation is the same. My parents refused to have a conversation about feelings. They refused to do the work. They refused to look at their trauma. They refused to go to therapy. They refused psychedelic medicine. They refused conversation. And as much as my little girl would love them to fucking show up, like I have to let go of what Christopher calls like that tyranny of hope,
Yeah.
right? Like that hope that is so powerful in me. Will my parents come to my goddamn wedding? Is the same hope that I hear in this person's conversation. And that is devastating in and of itself. And I am sorry. And I know what that feels like. And it is going to be your work not to heal them, not to heal that person, not to heal his trauma, not to make him go to therapy or try new things or try to get back together, even. But it is your work to care for yourself in that and understand needs, boundaries, desires, so that when you engage in a relationship again, you can set yourself up for success. Anything you'd want to add to that kind of conversation and my
Yeah, I
response?
mean, just in general, I mean, the best we can do is frame choices, right? And say, look, you can continue to not do this work, and it is your right, and I respect your autonomy. If you choose not to do this work, here is the consequence of that choice
Hmm.
for our relationship and for me. And right, whatever that is for you, I'm going to leave you, or I'm going to leave this relationship. I'm going to open up this relationship, and stay. I'm gonna those are the two that come to my mind. But I mean, again, you're only limited by my own imagination or yours, right? But frame the choices. You have the absolute right to do this, but get real clear on what your choice is going to be if they continue to make the choice not to do their personal work.
Yeah.
And then frame that choice to them as clearly and as kindly as you can. And if you can't do it kindly, do it clearly, right? Ideally, you do it clearly and kindly, but if you have to pick one, pick clarity over kindness. Ideally, we want both,
Hmm.
but clarity is more important when we're talking about other adults and even
Yeah.
kids for that matter.
Yeah.
Even kids for that matter.
And there's another thing in the broader chat, which is I'm in the middle of a stay or go decision with a partner, and figuring out the new ongoing relationship because of my partner's orientation, which would necessarily require a platonic relationship. And that's it, kind of exactly what you were saying is like there is a choice, right? And this person who wrote the comment, you have the choice to stay in a platonic relationship if you want to.
Right.
And if you don't, then there's other choices to be made. But your partner can't choose their orientation. And great that they discovered this about themselves, and I'm sorry that that happened to you because now you have to make this, what I can imagine is a heartbreaking choice between the person you love and presumably want to be with and be intimate with who isn't available for that anymore.
So, and there's a nuance here, and I don't know your situation. It is entirely possible for a gay person to have very good sex with one member of the opposite sex. So, from a clinical standpoint, sexual orientation is literally what turns your head at the beach. Male-bodied people, female-bodied people, or both, or none,
Hey,
right?
everybody.
Yeah, yeah. Andrea's in everybody. Like taking her to Austin, Texas was so much fun. She's like, I mean, her head was on a swivel the whole time. Like whatever turns your head on 6th Street in Austin is your sexual orientation. And keep in mind that none happens. That none happens. It's called asexuality. So just because you have a mixed orientation couple, say with a straight woman and a gay man, doesn't mean you can't have great sex between the two of you. It just means that that gay man is still gay and doesn't want to have sex with any other women and may want to have sexual expression with men. Now, if your partner is saying we're in a mixed orientation relationship and I need you to accept that, that's hurdle one. If they're saying I'm gay and we're in a mixed orientation relationship and I want to stop having sex with you, that's a different kettle of fish. So not all mixed orientation relationships are sexless, is all I'm saying. So, that's just a pro tip. I mean, Andrea has a great story about learning what bisexuality was, and once she realized that existed, she's found her identity in that label, in that life, in that way of being in the world. It is also possible for a gay person to have sex with one member of the opposite sex. It just means they're not attracted to anybody else of that sex, right? So sexlessness isn't guaranteed with mixed orientation relationships. If you have a mixed orientation and a sexless one, they're two separate problems, but they're very much intertwined.
Okay. I have one more. And again, this is one of the side conversations, so I'm going to summarize really quickly. So it sounds like it's a male-female um, partner. I discovered my partner was living a double life, and I was going through my own stuff, so I didn't really question this. We've done therapy, and our sex life has changed, but I'm trying to understand what's actually healed versus what's resolved. We've done therapy, things have changed, but I can't tell if we've repaired things or if I've just gotten used to it. I want to figure out how to tell the difference between these two, but he gets defensive when I bring it up since he believes we are past it. I know we are healed, but also didn't heal. To which I replied, you know, healing is this spiral, right? I like to think of us as like really tight rosebuds. And when one petal emerges, it reveals other stuff. And then that reveals more and that reveals more. So too with healing, so too with sexuality, so too with a lot of things. And what I also said to this person was defensiveness is actually one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, which is to say that is a big red flag in relationship. And so I dropped those into the main chat and everyone can see them. And there's a link to the four horsemen. These four horsemen are criticism. You're such an idiot. Why would you do that? Contempt. Um, what would be contempt? What would be the difference? Like, what's an example of contempt?
You are so low class that you are just like your mother.
Oh,
You just
you're always
like
like this.
I can't believe no, it's not quite like that. It's you are fundamental. There's something wrong with you,
Mm, yeah.
right?
Okay.
Like you are low. I am better than,
Yeah.
right? I don't like who you are. It's
Yeah.
not I don't like what you did. Like so that's criticism,
Yeah.
right? But I don't like who you are. That's
Mm.
contempt.
Okay. And then defensiveness, right? We've had this conversation. This happened forever ago. Like, I'm over it. Like, why aren't you over it? Like, that defensiveness, first of all, sucks. And I'm really sorry. And that is really a deeply troubling approach to healing in relationship. The other one is stonewalling, which is, I don't want to talk about this anymore. I need you to not talk about this. I'm not up for this conversation ever
Anybody
again.
have a partner who does this? You're trying to talk to them and they're doing this?
Yeah.
It's so easy to stonewall now, y'all. It's crazy.
Yes.
So the things I would add to this, and this adds some complication and nuance, is, and I see this a lot with surveillance behavior. So oftentimes after an initial repair and we're in relationship number two, the betrayed partner wants passwords, access to emails, everything. They don't want the other person to have any individuality or boundaries because they can't trust them. The only way I can trust them is to control. That is not a recipe for a lasting relationship number two. And if we can't get past that, then the writing's kind of on the wall in terms of discernment and stay and go. If the only way to stay, remember what we talked about with lie-inducing agreements? Perpetual surveillance is a lie-inducing agreement. You're just making a better spy, right? You're not keeping them honest. You're making them a better liar, right? So there is something about, hey, we went through this. There's nothing more for me to tell you. And this is years later. This isn't in the aftermath. And it's clear that the healing hasn't happened for you. And I'm so sorry. I know I caused it, but I don't have the time machine to go back and make a different choice. So I genuinely don't know how we live together. Okay, now it's do we go back into therapy to try to figure that out? Is it an individual therapy or a relational therapy? Right? And that's a big question, right? But at
Mhm.
some point, if the betrayed person can't move on, then that is an indication that relationship number two won't last, right? So something didn't happen right in the repair process, or repair itself and agreeing to stay was itself a lie-inducing agreement.
Okay. Yeah. Somebody also asked in the chat. First of all, I want to say we are at time. So if anybody wants to bounce, please feel free to move onwards with your morning or your afternoon. This is
Okay.
continually recorded. So if you missed the last like 10 minutes or so of the conversation, we will have it for you. I also know we're in kind of the juicy parts of the questions.
But before you go, let me tell you the truth of what happened to my family. So, as it turns out, unbeknownst to the 5-year-old I was, up to I would say the 30-year-old I was, I never knew that my parents were swingers and that my dad was what we would call now polyamorous, meaning he tolerated the open relationship because my mom was a voracious sexual person and she wanted sex with a lot of different people. And he finally got tired of the polyamory, the non-monogamy that he was tolerating, and he got done tolerating, and he started a new relationship with the woman that my sister saw at 16 years old through the car window, and he stayed with that woman for over 25 years. And they ended up with their own family, and he died in a monogamous relationship to her because what he really wanted was monogamy. He didn't want an open relationship, but he tolerated it. They didn't have this language then. That's what really happened to my parents. It wasn't the simple story that dad was bad, and the message I got was that all men were bad. And it's been my life's work to unwind that. There's the shame-based work. And that was my work individually. I couldn't do that in relationship therapy. I had to do that in my own work. So that was the real story of what happened to my family. And before we go, I wanted to close that loop for you. Thank you all for listening to me today. It's been a lot of information. If you ever want to get in touch with me or have follow-up questions, the email is simply my name, Christopher Brown at me.com, me.com. It's an old Apple handle. Shoot me an email. I'm happy to share more of my story or hear more of yours. Thank you.
All right. So I dropped those links in and we can continue chatting for those of you who want to stay. So a couple of questions. So one, somebody asked, I would love more conversational skills about how to stay calm and help each other stay in the hard conversations, assuming no physical, emotional abuse. Okay. So I dropped in the four horsemen, right? Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling. Those four horsemen have antidotes. And the antidotes I also dropped in, and those are deeply important. And I would recommend that for everybody to take a look at both the four horsemen and the antidotes, because the antidotes are how we start to practice having those safer conversations, right? So for the person who says, my partner gets super defensive, and Christopher addressed this, but just to put a really fine point on it, the antidote to defensiveness is self-responsibility. Instead of saying, I did everything I could. Why is this not enough? Why do you keep asking, right? That defensive behavior. It is, I know I did this. I know I hurt you, and I am really sorry. And what do you need? What do we need to start to move forward, right? That is the antidote to that defensiveness that comes up. So the antidotes are really powerful. One of the other antidotes is self-soothing, right? And I think that's the antidote to stonewalling, which is to say, if I'm in a conversation, and like Christopher said, sometimes it's our old stuff, right? My parents didn't pay enough attention to me, and so I spent a lot of time alone. So for me, closeness equals distance. And so when Christopher gets really close, I sometimes get distant, right? My job is to know that that is not present, that that's old, and to self-soothe in the moment. Okay, I'm feeling my heart racing. I'm feeling some butterflies in my tummy. I really want to have this conversation, but I need to, take a walk for 5 minutes and go sit in the sunshine because I really need to calm down before I have this conversation. That's how you take responsibility for your self-soothing and for staying in those hard conversations. I think one of the things about having the hard conversations is denoting that it's a hard conversation. And I think we don't often do that. We just like feel our stuff and don't necessarily express it instead of saying things like, I'm feeling really vulnerable to share this with you, and I'm afraid you're going to laugh at me. Like, that's a really bold statement to start a conversation. Or, I know we've talked about this a bunch, but it still comes up, and I still feel really hurt, and I would really like to talk with you about it. Are you open to that? Right? Those types of conversations that start with your feeling, starting with a little bit of that vulnerability or a lot of that vulnerability, and making it an invitation, right? And for the person who I was chatting with, whose partner gets very, very defensive, that kind of soft startup might not work for them. That might actually require a third party mediator like myself or Christopher to sit with you. I think Christopher, in this particular case, to sit with you and really be the third party who can say, like, hey, person who cheated or person who says they're done or is getting defensive, like, we need to really listen to this person who's having a hard time, right? We start with the person who's having a hard time. So, one of the final things I'll recommend in terms of like how to have those hard conversations, especially if you don't normally have them in your partnership. One is to, come to workshops like this where we start to talk about it and start to have some of those hard conversations in a conversational way, tips and tricks how to do this. Another one would be to engage with coaching or therapy as a way to bring a third party in so that, you know, this is a hard conversation. Let's bring in an expert. We've never talked about our relationship agreements. Let's bring in somebody who's really good at creating them, right? Like, how do we bring in expertise either in a casual form like a workshop or in a one on one form like in coaching or therapy? Those are other ways to do it. And then being in that kind of, in my language, I would say like an embodied place of like, how do you caretake yourself? How do I come back to my breath? How do I come back to my body? What do I do when I feel activated? How am I able to stay in curiosity, like Christopher said, right? Not being in my feelings, in my defensiveness, in my stuff, but instead be like, well, tell me what's happening in you when I talk about this. Oh, like that's ninja level communication skills, right? To really be like, I'm very upset right now, or I'm very activated. What's happening in you, right? That is a skill, right? And conversation and relationship is a skill to be practiced. And that's why we do these free workshops, is to start to have these conversations. But like, you can't just go to your first yoga class and expect to do all the things. Like, we have to start really small. So one of the things I love to direct people into, I think is really helpful, is have what I call the meta conversation, which is I would like to have a conversation about this thing. Are you open to that? First of all, get consent. Are you open to having this conversation? Yes or no? And if so, when can we do it? Can we have a conversation about this tomorrow afternoon when we go for a walk? We don't spring it on people on their way out the door. We don't spring it on people over breakfast or after we've made love or before we've made love. We make space for their consent so that they can do their own awareness, embodiment, self-soothing, so that you can both show up to the conversation contained, embodied, present for whatever those hard conversations might be. In terms of like individual conversation prompts, I feel like that's better handled kind of in a one-on-one session once we know more about you. But those are kind of the broad brush approaches to that conversation. Anything you'd want to add to that?
You may have said this, I stepped away.
Yeah.
So you may have said this already. Number one thing, if you have so there's two ideas, there's four actually, about emotional regulation, right? But for our intents and purposes in this, there is self-regulation and co-regulation. So one is where your partner helps you regulate yourself, and one is where you regulate yourself. So the thing you can do, if these are hard for you to have or hard for your partner to have, is they can learn how to self-soothe. And in fact, that's the antidote to stonewalling, which I'm sure Andrea already said. So the now, if your partner won't self-soothe, then you're only really left with co-regulation. And if you want to attempt to help your partner regulate their nervous system, the most effective way to do it in conversation is validation, right? So you shift into I see you, I feel you, I know you. I see how upsetting this is for you. God, I see how hard this is. Ugh. Right? And I can see that you're dreading this, right? So there's levels of validation, not to get too, granular on it. But you can validate, validate, validate. Andrea and I have a, shorthand for this, relentless validation. After you provide relentless validation, if they have regulated, then you can try again to have the conversation. But basically, if you're flooded, either one of you or both of you, having a conversation, which is an emotional intensity of a level of self-reported level of 7 or higher, your brain literally has put the frontal lobe in the back seat of functioning, and it's now operating from the amygdala, so you can't problem solve. The frontal lobe is what problem solves. So if you're flooded, the work is to stop talking. But if you stop talking forever, that's just avoidance, right? So the key is you got to come back to it. And if my partner won't come back to it, then it becomes that framing the consequence. Hey, we can continue to avoid this as a strategy. I understand it. I get it. This is really hard. You've probably been avoiding stuff because you grew up in a household that was volatile, maybe with somebody who was raging, and avoiding that person made all the sense in the world. But if that's the best we can do, then the consequence to that avoidance is going to be, and that's where you really got to know what your consequence is and don't fake it. Because once you say, if we continue to avoid it, I leave, and then you don't, all you have proven is that you don't mean what you say. So don't say it unless you are ready to back it up. This is where it's a lot like parenting, right? Like parenting children is really difficult because if when you punish your kid, say they're acting out in a movie theater, well, we don't do that so much anymore, but we're acting out in a restaurant, and then the ultimate thing is to leave because they're acting out and they won't do anything else. Well, you leave before you get your favorite dessert. Oh. So you punish yourself as much as you're punishing the kid, right? It's kind of the same idea, right? Like I'm punishing, oh, to really enforce my own boundary, it means I'm going to have to blank, you know? So be sure you're ready to back it up because if you're not, we're just saying like, oh, you don't mean what you say, so it doesn't really matter. So that's the only things I would add there is that co-regulation, self-regulation, framing of choices.
Yeah. There's another question in the chat that I think is a little bit bigger than just a question in the chat that we can really tackle. But what it's how do you navigate the betrayal? How do you move on, even if you want to?
Yeah, the biggest thing for me is that you lose the golden halo of denial. Once it happens to you, it can never not happen. And once it's happened once, there's no chance that there's no chance it could happen again. Right? So it depends on if you can become a pragmatic romantic. Andrea said earlier it's a wound and it takes time to heal. For those of you all of a certain age, we've all had wounds of a certain type and they heal, but when the weather is a certain way, I get an ache in that joint that was injured before, even though it's healed. This is similar. There are going to be times where the aches in the joints come in the cold weather. Now, you may have an agreement for what kind of reassurance you can provide with partner. At some point, it may become something that you have to self-soothe. But yeah, it's part of the load you carry if you choose to build relationship number two. Now, in in hmm, debating how I want to say this, if you leave a relationship because you want to chase the one who will never hurt me, that's an attachment to an unrealistic expectation of relationship in this world. And inevitably, there will be conflict and there will be disappointment. So if I'm chasing because I want to find the frictionless relationship, it doesn't exist. Not with another human. It exists with AI now, which is why we're seeing the rise of AI relationships because there's no friction there. But they're imaginary and they're for profit, for somebody else's profit, by the way.
Hmm.
So but if you say, okay, I know there's going to be friction in every relationship, but I can't live with this friction, that's different. That's different. So it becomes a very personal choice of can I live with this reality without engaging in the basic denial, right? Because basic denial doesn't last after the exposure of infidelity and betrayal.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is being really honest with yourself. Like, what are the reasons that you want to stay? Is it because of appearances? Is it because of the children? Is it because you've built a life together and the scaffolding of taking that shit apart is exhausting?
Whew, talk
Yes,
about.
those are valid reasons.
I mean, blowing
Or
up your
it's
life is hard. And I tell that to everybody. I do discernment counseling and stay or go dilemmas, and blowing up your life is hard. Let's be sure it's not some pattern repetition of your history or some unconscious need that's not getting expressed by you, right? So let's be really thoughtful. And sometimes leaving is the right move, but it's
it's
worth some
hard.
excavation emotionally to figure that out why it's the right move.
Yeah. And in terms of like how we move on, and I feel like this was, I'm going to kind of circle back to kind of the conversations I was having and what I was seeing in the chat more generally is really like, and I wrote this post the other day about kind of intuition and impulse. And I keep coming back to these ideas of like, what does our animal body want? Right? Like, what is your intuition telling you about this relationship, about this person, about this situation? And can you learn to tune into that and trust that? Right? Like, even though it's going to be a huge pain in the ass to blow up my life, even though this is going to be really hard for my kids, even though we've been married for 20 years, even though XYZ, is my body telling me that it's time to go? Is my body telling me that tolerating this person's defensiveness or this person's inability to do the work is exhausting? That's information. And I think especially as women, but people in general, there's this real, we live in a world that keeps us distracted, right? We have social media, we have email notifications, we have all these things. And
That's called
so,
auto regulation, by the way.
yeah. And like I love a good doom scroll, great. And please follow me on Instagram. Thank you very much. But, when we start to slow down and pay attention, when we start to do the work of therapy, of breath work, of psychedelic medicine, of sexual healing, which is very much what my work is rooted in. It's like, what happens if we start with sex as the healing place? What does that uncover about our animal body and our intuition and what we really want and what we're tolerating? And I think that a lot of us are really tolerating a huge pile of stuff in our lives that we've not quite interrogated, whether that's overgiving, whether that's dealing with a person's bad behavior,
That's what happened
with
with my dad. He was tolerating. He was in polyamory all that time, and he finally said, "That's it." And he didn't have the conversational skills to do it, so he acted it out, starting the affair with the woman who became his longest, tenured spouse over 25 years, right? So, I mean, Andrea is spot on there.
and somebody just wrote in the chat, I've never felt so loved and accepted for who I am with a partner who cheated and kind of won't do his work. And I've never felt so supported and I don't want to let that go. Yeah, I hear that. And, that's where you are at choice at all times, right? You can decide the way that this person makes me feel loved is worth some of this distress. Or you can decide, I deserve to be loved like that without the distress, right? I deserve to be able to be in a partnership where somebody is doing the work and being honest, right? But you are ultimately at choice for that. Again, with knowing like we cannot change that person. Can you be in relationship with them feeling loved while also simultaneously feeling heartbroken about what happened? I can't answer that for you. Christopher can't answer that.
can you create a relationship structure that's broad enough to contain all of your partner and whatever meaning was behind their infidelity, right? That becomes the relationship for happy marriage or relationship number two, happy under the definition of long lasting with high relationship satisfaction, not just longevity. The other thing I would say to that, my immediate comment when I read it was that I've never felt so loved and accepted for who I am and so supported, and I don't want to let that go. And again, I know no other context. But what comes to mind philosophically is the idea of attachment in adulthood is to be securely attached to self. So, how can you take this experience of being loved by another and know that that is who you are? That is not because of who they are, that is because of who you are. And how do you internalize that love and acceptance for who you are in yourself? And if it wasn't only situated in that other person across from you, but it was truly in your bones, would you stay?
Good question. So, thank you all for staying a little bit late. I really appreciate you staying on. What great conversations. I think it seems to have opened up a lot for a lot of people. I'm going to pause the recording now and we can stay on for another 10 minutes or so for questions.